Good morning, Team Alabama. We are going to begin reading Hidden Figures by Margot Shetterly. I'm going to share the back of the book with you, and you're going to find some of the same kinds of things happening in this time frame that happened in Anne Frank. World War II and the things that were going on in our country are similar to some of the things that you will hear about in this book as well. So you'll be able to make some text-to-text connections where one book reminds you of another book, and that will you'll hear some of the same things that were going on. From World War II through NASA's golden age, 4 African American women confidently and courageously stepped into the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, now known as NASA. Their job? To provide the mathematical calculations that would help increase airplane production during wartime and eventually send the United States into space for the very first time. Hidden Figures follows the stories of Dorothy Vaughan, Mary Jackson, Katherine Johnson, and Christine Darden, who participated in some of the United States' greatest aeronautic successes. These women lived through and persevered against the backdrop of some of the biggest movements ever to shape our nation's history: the Civil Rights era, the space race, and the fight for gender equality. With photographs and rich historical detail, Margot Lee Shetterly brings to life the struggles these 4 women and others overcame to forever change the face of air and space travel. So that is the reason that you will do facts on the civil rights movement, space race, and women's rights or gender equality. You're going to do 10 to 15 facts about that because that is very much what is going on in society during this book. Okay, so you'll do 10 to 15 facts on each of those and send it as one Google Doc, and that's in the writing area on your Canvas page. Also, we will do the 50 facts that we always do at the start of a book or throughout the book, 10 questions and 10 vocabulary words, and you will be able to pick out whichever questions you want and the vocab that you want. In order to start your facts, we might go ahead and make a section with each of these ladies' names because they'll give a little bit of facts about each of the ladies to start with. So you might, on your Google Doc at this time, write Dorothy Vaughan, Mary Jackson, Katherine Johnson, and Christine Darden. And that way you have that ready to put the facts as we hear them. There's a prologue at the very beginning of this, written by the author, and she tells a little bit of the background of what was going on in her life as she was growing up. So, growing up in Hampton, Virginia, I assumed the faces of science were brown like mine. My dad worked at the Langley Research Center at NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. He started there as an engineering intern in 1964 and retired as an internationally respected climate scientist in 2004. Our next-door neighbor taught physics. Our church pews were crowded with mathematicians. I knew so many African Americans working in science and math and engineering that I thought that's just what black folks did. My father, who as a high school student had wanted to study electrical engineering, lived a different story. Become a physical education teacher, my grandfather told him. He thought that my dad would have trouble finding work as an engineer. In the 1960s, most college-educated African Americans took teaching jobs or worked for the post office. As late as 1970, just 1% of all American engineers were black, and my father was one of them. Because of my father's job, I was part of the NASA family. I grew up saving my allowance to buy tickets to ride ponies and the annual NASA Carnival and sharing my Christmas wish list with Santa at the NASA holiday party. On Thursday nights, I sat with my family and cheered for the Stars, my dad's NBA team. That's the NASA Basketball Association. My Sunday school teacher worked at NASA as a computer, doing the complex math for the aerospace engineers. She wasn't alone, and from the 1940s through the 1970s, hundreds of women, many of whom were black, worked as mathematicians at NASA. It wasn't until I was older that I appreciated just how extraordinary this occupation was for black women in the South during the days of segregation. The first 5 women were hired at Langley as computers in 1935, and they were white. 10 years later, There were more than 400 women working as mathematicians, and many of them were black. The contributions made by these African American women have never been heralded or praised, but they deserve to be remembered, and not as a side note in someone else's account, but as the center of their own story. These women should be celebrated not just because they are black or because they are women, but because they are an important part of American history, and this is their story. So, Chapter 1, setting the scene. Dorothy Vaughan, Mary Jackson, Katherine Johnson, and Christine Darden loved math. As children, they showed special skills in arithmetic, and they went on to study mathematics in college. After graduation, they worked as teachers before going on to work as computers or mathematicians for the government's Air and Space program. Okay, so there's some great facts there. Each lady loved math, and they all showed a special skill in it as a child. And then they all studied math in college. Over the years, hundreds of women worked as mathematicians for the federal agency called NACA, N-A-C-A, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics. And you could list that as a fact. Many women worked for NACA, N-A-C-A, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, which researched and promoted the study of flight. But these women were among many who distinguished themselves with their talents and hard work. Okay, now here are some facts about Dorothy Vaughan. Dorothy Vaughan was a pioneer. She joined the NACA in 1943. The first year, the agency began hiring African American women as computers, and